Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Hey, do me a favor. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for the notifications. And if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you do that 5 star. If you can't get up in the morning and you need a pick me up, I'm telling you now, Blackout Coffee, the coffee for America's warriors. That's right, America's warriors. It's the be awake, don't be woke coffee. Tons of flavors, great taste, amazing coffee. So go to www.blackoutcoffee.com and at checkout, punch in everyday BS. That's right, everyday BS. So get yourself some. Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I got a fantastic guest, Gavi. He's the co-host of is it Leaving
Leaving
the
Eden podcast.
and he is a cold researcher. So Gavi, welcome to the show, brother. Thanks so much, man, for jumping on with me today.
I'm pleased to be here. I'm having a wonderful time. It's a nice afternoon. I'm in Philadelphia right now, and that's where I live. And it's almost summer, and the weather is nice, so I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic, brother. I'm fantastic, man. I grew up in Philly myself, so I thought that was great because we had that little connection already. So,
Go Birds!
yeah, go birds, baby. I bleed green.
Yeah.
But have you gone to many games in Philly?
My girlfriend got me tickets, a Hanukkah present last year, and I was so excited. She got us tickets to go see the Eagles play the Cardinals, and I was so excited because I was sure they were going to win because the Cardinals are going to be bad. Um, and they did not win that game.
Uh,
Uh, it was deeply disappointing. It also happened to be Jason Kelsey's last game at the Link, which was
oh,
kind of a depressing last game for that guy to have at the Link, considering the career that he's had. But we go to Eagles tailgates. I got a projector TV, so I always have friends over. We watch the games. It's a lot of fun. I've been going to a few Phillies games as well, so that's also fun.
yeah.
But
I mean, I'm 49. I'll be 50 this year. Me growing up, man, tailgating was the thing to do. I remember as a kid going to the vet stadium and things like that, and hanging out in the parking lot with my pops, and we always took like a little tiny barbecue grill, and we would grill hot dogs and burgers and hang out with other guys and things like that. Man, it was awesome. But
it's a real
yeah,
community, you
oh,
know.
oh, yeah, it
Oh,
it it truly is, man. And I'll tell you what, man, Philly fans are probably some of the most toughest fans in the country when it comes to their sports teams, brother.
Oh, I've experienced this. This is for real. I mean, I'm from Portland, Oregon. So my team is, as you can see, my team is the Portland Trailblazers for basketball, and
Gotcha.
that's like Portland loves the Trailblazers, but it's also like it's the only game in town, so they gotta love the Trailblazers.
Right.
And we do love the Trailblazers. In fact, the Trailblazers are, even though they suck right now, are one of the most successful franchises of NBA history as far as like win-loss record, which a lot of people don't know that, but they're almost
Yeah.
always in the playoffs, except for the last few years when they haven't been in the playoffs because they've been bad. But don't get me onto that. I could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours about the future of the Portland Trailblazers organization, but Portland fans go for the Trailblazers not quite as hard as Philly fans go for the Eagles, just because I think that people in Portland smoke more weed and people in Philly drink more. But if those things were reversed, I could definitely see it being that way.
Yeah. I think if I'm correct too, I think Philly was like the first city that actually put a judge in jail in the stadium. So if you busted your balls and did something stupid at the stadium, you went right downstairs to jail and a judge, if I'm correct, if I remember that correctly.
Man, imagine being the one judge whose job it was to work the Eagles games when they're playing. Man, although that would be a bummer. You couldn't be an Eagles fan unless you had like um a TV in the courtroom,
Right.
or you could, say objection. I really need to see what play is going on. We can pick it up at the 2-minute warning.
Dude, yeah. Oh, I just see like instead of the black coat, he's got the green, he's got the Eagles colors on and stuff like that. So that would
Yeah,
be
that's
pretty
what I
wild.
could see. I could
Yeah,
see
right.
Yeah,
So
either that. No, what I'm imagining is I'm imagining like the bench, and it's either like the Fanatic or Gritty behind the bench, uh, banging the gavel. Uh,
heck yeah, man. So let me ask you, what about hockey, man? Are you into the hockey too, man? You
I
ever gone to
never
a
grew up a
Flyers game?
hockey fan. My friend Bren keeps trying to get me into hockey. He's a huge Flyers fan, but he played growing up. Growing up in Portland, hockey's not a big thing. Kids don't play hockey growing up there, so I wasn't my thing. But I haven't been to a Flyers game yet, but I plan to go. Yeah.
I know a while back I was watching a Joe Rogan episode, and he had Rob Zombie on. Rob, being a movie director that he does a lot of things, he was looking to do a film based on the old Philadelphia Broad Street Bullies, where they went up
Mm,
against the Russians in the 70s. And it literally came to a point to what happened was is like the Flyers played the Russians, and we kicked the shit out of the Russians on the ice,
hell
and they
yeah.
did not want to come back out on the ice and play. And they were pretty much like, well, you don't come back, you don't get paid. When they came back, man, they just got their asses handed to them.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know the history of that story, but that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, man.
That's I mean, I love a good sports movie. I love a good sports story. I
Yeah.
just feel like a lot of some of the biopics that I've been, they've been coming out with lately. I don't know. Some of the music biopics I've been kind of disappointed by. I didn't really like the Bob Marley one. I thought the Queen one was kind of mid. Um, I feel like the genre of biopics is maybe a little bit played out at this point, but I could see if there was a really good story, somebody telling it properly.
Yeah. Did you see the Elton John Rocket Man?
I
That
love
was
that one.
that one was actually pretty good. My wife and I took my wife to see that when it came out, and I wasn't really interested because I knew they're like it's more like a musical than it is like a movie and whatnot. So I was like, all right, I'll go and see it. But and we ended up having a good time checking it out.
I enjoyed that one, and I think I liked it a lot better than the Queen because it came out around the same time as the Queen one.
I believe so.
Um, and the Queen one, they were just like, okay, let's just chronologically, these are the things that happened. Only the things that they said happened weren't actually historically accurate. Uh, and they're just like, okay, this plot point, play a song. This plot point, play a song. This plot point, play, and it just didn't really make thematic sense. And it just seemed like it felt like it more like a cynical cash grab rather than feeling like a real a cohesive movie that told a real story. Whereas I
Yeah,
do feel like with the Elton John one, while you have a little bit more leeway and you're not maybe going to do everything exactly as it happened in real life, you have a little bit more leeway if you're just saying, oh well, we're doing this as a musical and we're getting the actors to sing the songs instead of just like playing recordings of the songs that are already there and doing an original, doing it as a musical theater piece rather than just trying to do it as like a straight biopic. Um, you have a little bit more leeway to do things thematically that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise have the leeway to do if you were just going to do it straight. Um,
yeah,
and so for that reason, I think that movie worked for me a lot better. I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Also, I'm just a huge fan of Elton John's music, so that was fun to see.
yeah. I enjoyed the cinematography part of where they would freeze and he would be in like motion. And when he came to California and he played, and
Oh yeah, Dodger Stadium, and he had like the sequin Dodgers jersey on. That was a fun scene.
yeah, there were
Yeah,
some cool scenes in that movie, man. I have to admit. So
yeah.
there was definitely some coolness to that movie in general.
Yeah, I got a lot of enjoyment out of that one. A few of the other ones I didn't get a lot of enjoyment out of. I don't know. I think it just really depends on what your intentions are. If you just want to make something that is kind of be like a I don't know. Bohemian Rhapsody to me felt kind of cheap. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
Wayne's World, baby, Wayne's World. It's all about Wayne's World.
yeah, great movie.
Yeah,
We should do a Wayne's World biopic. That's what we need. We need a.
yeah, man. I came across a TikTok the other
Oh, I'm
day.
not on TikTok.
It's just a short, and I
Yeah.
also I believe I've seen it on Instagram as well. But it's a gentleman singing, lip syncing to Bohemian Rhapsody, but he's in a bathroom mirror, and the way he angles the mirror is he gets like he's doing all the
Oh yeah,
voice.
does he have like the three-way folding mirror? I have one of
Yeah,
those. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. It was pretty wild. It was pretty
That's
cool.
fun. That's fun.
So you are the co-host of Leaving Eden podcast,
Yes.
and you are a cult researcher. Am I correct?
Yeah, so I didn't become a cult researcher until we started doing this podcast, but now that's what I call myself. Before we started doing this podcast, I was a guy who worked doing paperwork in the back office of a car dealership. Um and then my friend who also worked at the car dealership, she told me that she was raised in a cult, and I was like, that's interesting. Tell me about that. And so
Mm.
she told me about that, and I thought that was interesting. And then in like 2020, the pandemic hit, and we were, you know, both laid off from our jobs. We were both collecting unemployment checks. And we didn't really have anything to do. So we just decided, let's start a podcast about how you were raised in a cult. And that was about 4 years ago. And now we have been doing this podcast for about 4 years. And yeah, and now I know a lot more than I did back then.
How well has it taken off for you guys with this podcast? I mean,
Oh, really well. It's like my main source of income now.
really,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
fantastic, brother. That's
I mean,
fantastic.
I have some like side hustles that I have to do, just to make sure, because like podcasting, unless you're really famous and successful, it's hard to make a ton of money on that. But like, it's the main thing. I also do some other stuff on the side to try to get money coming in. But as far as like a job that you can do from your house from anywhere, I really love it.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
You know, I've watched a lot of documentaries on Cole. You know, uh, God, Koresh and
Branch Davidians. Yeah.
yeah, I watched that. George Jones,
Jim Jones. Yeah.
Jim, I'm sorry, Jim
Yeah.
Jones, and it's just like to have that mindset to be able to go and get into the brain, like the mindset of these people, of his followers, and be like, hey, look, this is who I am. I am the Messiah, and whatnot, the Messiah. And, you know, I, God talks to me, and I'm here to do his work. Like you've been doing this a while. You've researched some of this stuff, I'm sure. What draws somebody to join a cult?
I mean, it could be anything, if you're like anything that you're feeling insecure about, anything that you're feeling unhappy about, and somebody's promising a solution to that. Like the misconception is that, you know, somebody starts out saying, I want to start a cult, and decides to just like start a cult and says, okay, cool, let me get a property. Now let me go find some followers. That's not really how this works. It'll start with somebody who is an influential person. Just more often than not, they'll just be some like grifter who's kind of a con artist and will get good at lying to people, get good at manipulating people, and getting people to contribute more and more and more, and then they'll just keep elevating themselves more and more and more. And that's
That
how a lot of these things kind
it's
of
an
go.
effect. I call
Yeah.
it it's an effect.
I mean, like, let me think of another, like, there are so many. I mean, you could even consider, and Stephen Hassan, who is, I think, one of the leading cult experts. um he's a guy who actually came up with a model for identifying authoritarian and coercive and cult control over people, called the BITE model, which stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotion control, which are like the four aspects of cult control. He considers that like abusive interpersonal relationships, like if you're in abusive marriage, abusive partnership, that is something that he considers to be like a one-on-one cult. So it's not necessarily like, oh well, all religions are a cult until they get 1 million members, and then they're officially a religion now and not a cult. Or it's not like, oh, religion is just a cult plus 1,000 years, because these are all things that I've heard people say. But really what it comes down to is the degree of coercive control that they are going to take over your life. So that could be something that is like a religious group that you would want to join, and that you find out, oh wow, now I'm here and they're telling me that I have to do this thing that I don't want to do, but now I feel like I have to do that thing. I guess I'm just going to go along with it. Or it could be like you're in an abusive relationship where you're like, I don't know who I am anymore outside of this relationship, and my whole sense of identity comes from being in this relationship that is really not healthy. um
So in some
or it
sense,
could
they're kind of like turning the tables on this person to where they're using what they have gone through to benefit them by, I guess you can say, like almost like cradling a baby. Like, okay, you come to me and I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to get you to where you need to be in some sense.
Yeah, but the thing is that it is kind of like Lucy pulling the football from Charlie Brown, is that you think, "Oh, well, if I only sacrifice this other piece of myself, then like I will get to how I really need to feel, which is either, right with God or right with whatever deity is speaking through this cult leader, I guess." The cults that we talk about mainly are focused around Christian fundamentalism. So
Hmm.
my friend Sadie, who I host the show with, she was raised in a branch of Christian. Do you know who the Duggars are?
Is that
That's the family, 19 Kids and Counting.
yeah, on television? Am I
Yeah,
right?
they had a show on
Yep.
TLC. The son is in prison for being a pedophile.
Oh,
Um,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
there's a trial a couple years ago about that. Um, a couple of the daughters have come out with books about how they were raised. The, she was raised essentially like one step less insane level of Christian fundamentalism than that.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things that we talk about, but she's a very smart person, so she's really good at talking about the things that she went through an intellectual, like, and making it a very processable for people like me who have never been through anything like that. But also she's good at intellectualizing it so that other people who have been through something like that are able to kind of intellectually process what they've been through, even if they themselves don't necessarily have the language for it. So it's really good. She's really good at talking about those things in those respects. So that's sort of
How
where. Oh yeah.
how big of a scene is that actually? I mean, are they individual groups? Are they connected groups? Are they spread out just in
So
one state or amongst the states?
they're like loosely affiliated. So essentially what it will be is there will be, they kind of, it's independent churches, that the idea is that there is no authority. God is the highest authority, and then below God is your local church. So there's no like pope or denomination that's between your local church and God. Um but they essentially loosely affiliate with one another based on where your pastor would have gone to Bible college. And the church that like her branch of Christian fundamentalism was, the Bible college that hers was based around was a Bible college in Hammond, Indiana, called First Baptist Church of Hammond. And this was a church that was run by a pastor named Jack Hiles. Uh, from I think like 1960 until he died in 2001, and then it was taken over by his son-in-law, who was a man named Jack Scop. Jack Scop was, until I think 2 years ago, in prison for sexually abusing a 16-year-old who was a church member. So that's kind of the thing that happens there, is that there is very little accountability for people who are in leadership, and there is also a culture of blame and shame around especially women and women's sexuality, and a culture of like sexual purity, where anything that kind of deviates from whatever they consider the norm to be, or even if you wear clothes that somebody might consider to be sexually exciting, then
Is this
anything that happens to you is like your fault. So there's
is
a
this
culture. Yeah.
is this where they have to wear certain garments? Like they have to keep dresses below the knee,
Yes.
have to wear sweaters, and they can't show any type of shoulder or cleavage or
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. So the idea is that like if a man sees, I guess, the inside of your thigh, then he could be sexually attracted to you, and that man is like he is an animal. He can't contain himself, and that's not his fault. That's just the way God made him. So if he decides to do anything to you, then well, that's your fault. You shouldn't have provoked that into him. And so you end up with a culture like this where men are given no accountability for the things that they do, and if a man does something wrong, it's always on the fault of a woman. So,
let
and
me let
yeah.
let me ask you this. I've heard something and I've seen something online. I don't know how exactly true this is, but what is the percentage rate that a lot of these are held by a lot of men that are a lot of pedophilia and sexual assault and whatnot? Are there any statistic like numbers that say this is what happens a lot in these, I guess you could say, cults, religions?
Well, so I couldn't give you numbers about like how common the abuse is because on one hand, a lot of it just doesn't get reported.
Mm.
Um, and I have a friend whose name is Eric Skwarczynski. He has a show called the Preacher Boys podcast, and he does a fantastic job of platforming people who are survivors of this kind of like sexual abuse, religious abuse, things like that. And that's really what he focuses on. Um, and so I guess his show would be a fantastic one to check out. His name's Eric Skwarczynski. Um,
Yeah, you'll
I
definitely have to give me his info and I'll plug it in the description in this podcast as well.
Yeah, look it up. It's called the Preacher Boys podcast. He's a guy who was raised in a very similar branch of fundamentalism to my friend Sadie, and he has a show where it's basically just documenting the abuse, where we don't focus maybe as much on the abuse. We focus a lot on like history, theological concepts, things like that. Um, and we just do a different sort of style of show, but he's a good friend of mine, and his show is fantastic, and he talks about that stuff as well. And we talk about other cults that aren't necessarily Christian fundamentalism, and he focuses more on Christian fundamentalism, I think. But
Hmm.
he's a good person to check out for talking about that stuff. I couldn't give you exact numbers on how common like child sexual abuse is, but I would tell you that if you are somebody who is a sexual abuse who wants to abuse children, one of these hardcore Christian fundamentalist churches creates an environment where if you decide to do that, then excuse me, if you decide to do that, then there is much lower likelihood that you are going to get in trouble for it. Um, and it essentially creates an environment where abusers are allowed to become serial abusers, and there is guilt, there is shame, and there are in fact often institutionalized cover-ups of abuse, where what they'll do is they will take it's the same sort of thing that the Catholic Church got in trouble for all of those years ago, where there will be
Right.
somebody who maybe they're like a youth pastor and they're abusing the teenage girls who are in the youth group. Well, one of these girls, goes and tells somebody, and then it makes its way up to the pastor, and rather than saying, oh well, we're going to call the police about this because this isn't okay, what they'll do is they'll ship them off to a different church that's
Yeah.
like a loosely affiliated church. But because there's no like overarching denomination, you can't exactly prove like a RICO case like the same way that you would if there was like a uh like if it was like actually like a sex trafficking ring or something like that.
Now, the so-called pastors of these groups, is it generational, or are they, raised and put into position, or are they, like you said, going to school, learning, and then coming back? And are they voted in, or is the church, or the is it given to them? How does that
There's
work?
a lot of variation. Some of them it's kind of like, okay, well, here's the pastor, and the pastor, there's an expectation that the pastor's children will be going into ministry themselves. And
Hmm.
so they'll send their kids to whatever Bible college it was that they went to kind of get them prepared. And then after they get out of that Bible college, they'll go and be like, assistant pastor or like a music pastor or like a youth pastor or something at a different church to kind of get their experience going, and then they'll go and then there will be a church that will take them on as like the lead pastor. The other thing that can happen, this happened quite a bit back in the day within the independent fundamental Baptist movement, was they would send like somebody who was a recent graduate from one of these Bible colleges out and just say, hey, go plant a church in, I don't know, you're in Michigan, so what if I was like, go plant a church in Ypsilanti, Michigan?
Right.
And then they would have to go to Ypsilanti, Michigan, and knock on people's doors and say, come to Bible study in my house. And then eventually, hopefully, they would get enough people that would be coming to their Bible study that they could fundraise to get a church building and then start a church there. This is not a very successful strategy. And that was sort of a thing that you would do to somebody if you wanted to kind of F them over and kind of just maroon them somewhere.
Mm.
So there's a lot of variation, but if somebody is like the main pastor of a leader of, I don't want to say the leader of this denomination because they're not technically a denomination, they're all technically independent, but they congregate together based on like the specific Bible college. If
Right.
they're the leader of this and they say you go do this thing, you got to go do that thing if you want to keep your standing. So that's kind of how it can work.
I just recently watched an episode with, once again, Rogan. He had on Michelle Dowd. Have you heard of her?
I'm not familiar.
She escaped a cult, which was she was raised in. It was like a survival cult,
Oh
and
yeah.
it was a generational thing. Like it was all male until, I believe she said, until into the 60s, and then after that they started allowing to bring in women, but it was just like all male, and then it went into being able to get a wife and whatnot. So I mean, it was strange. If you get a chance, check out that episode. It's pretty fascinating.
That's interesting. Yeah, I might have to go check that out. I'll let you know most of, because I study cults so much. I kind of, and a lot of the stuff that I consume can be kind of disturbing. Um,
Mm.
some like when I'm listening to podcasts just on my own, a lot of times it'll just be like sports podcasts or uh stuff that isn't necessarily related to that field, just because I kind of do need to do like a brain cleanser. I'll do a lot of audiobooks,
You
but
gotta
I
do
might
a
have to go check that
decompression
one out.
zone.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
You-
but
you-
like that's the thing, is that people always ask me, "Oh, have you seen this documentary?" And usually the answer is no, I haven't seen the documentary, because I usually only like look at a specific cult documentary when I'm um either researching something specific to that, or like if there's something so big that I can't miss it. Like I'm trying to think of what one that was so big. I don't know. I watched like the first couple episodes of Twin Flames, but then I couldn't finish that one.
Mm.
Not because it was bad or anything, but just because I was like, I need to kind of detox from this stuff.
Well, the
Yeah.
Michelle Dowd one, I believe, she came out with a book. It's called Forager, and it's
Oh
like
yeah.
field notes on surviving a family cult. And I believe she basically, it was like some type of isolated mountain cult. It's pretty crazy.
That is crazy. I mean, there are people though that actually believe that, and part of that is, I think there's just a lot of fear out in the world right now, where people are just afraid, they're anxious, and part of joining a cult, um, and one
It's
of the
like
things that,
the end of days. They're just
yeah,
like, they're just waiting on it.
well, I mean, that's what David Koresh thought with the Branch Davidians, is that he was convinced that we were living through the end times. Of
Mm,
course, that was what, 30 years ago, and the world still hasn't ended yet. So I guess he
no,
wasn't right about that one. Who knew that? But
no.
they're like, if you're like, say, a person and you grow up and you have a really rough childhood, um, and maybe, your parents or somebody are into drugs, there's just not a lot of stability in your home, or you move around a lot, and you just have a difficult time finding where you belong, what's right, what's wrong, a lot of these really, high control fundamentalist groups, one of the things that they will do is they say essentially, we have an answer to every question. If you
Mhm.
want to know, how do I raise my kids right? Well, there is a right way to raise your kids and there's a wrong way to raise your kids. We have a like step-by-step guide on how to do that perfectly. And if you follow our guide to the letter, then your kids will turn out perfect. They'll be well behaved, they'll be happy. If you follow our step-by-step guide on how to dress, how to act, how to cook, you will find a husband or you will find a wife that is perfect, and God will bless your marriage because you follow all of the rules. And it is like a perfect way to do this. If you follow this rule book to the letter, then your life will be perfect. And if you're somebody who just hasn't had that level of stability in your life and you just are just like, I just want things to be okay, then they can provide that to you, but they don't actually provide that to you because you end up in a situation where you're being controlled or you're being abused, or you're just not being treated properly, or you're afraid of the outside world, and that is also extremely stressful. um
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of gets me too is the way some of these cults, where they're able to manipulate these people to such a point to where they turn over their 401ks, they sell
Mhm.
their property, they sign everything over to this so-called church, and then they end up with nothing, and it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. Have you are you a fan of Real Housewives?
The who?
Do you watch Real Housewives of Salt Lake City?
No.
Great show,
No.
by the way. I highly recommend. If you're a Real Housewives fan, I like Real Housewives. Real Housewives is fun. um
My wife and I watched total different things. I'll watch a lot of uh some like UFO documentaries and
oh
weird
yeah.
things, stuff like that, while my wife is sitting in another room watching, murder and the way women. I'm like, I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, look, if I get green Gatorade in a cup, I am not drinking it. Okay.
Blue Gatorade's the best Gatorade anyway, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the thing I saw today was somebody posted in the Facebook group that I'm in. Uh what is it? It's a Gister. It's half Guinness, half Monster. Um,
Mm,
and I looked at that and I thought, no, that looks like poison. Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's
so
that's a, oh man, that's a gut concoction right there,
ooh,
brother. Oh
yeah.
man. But yeah, I just, and like I said, I want, giving up all your money and being manipulated like that. I mean, it's mind blowing, and you see it so much, and it's just like, you, you try and put yourself into that person's shoes to know, like, how bad of a life are you having that you need to do this to be accepted. And it's so sad, but there are people like that, man, that just don't know.
Well, you see it all over the place. Not just with like as cults as we think of cults, but I think that, there are a lot of political ideologies that could function as cults. I think that, like I was saying before, abusive relationships, I
Mm,
absolutely think function as cults. I definitely think that that's an accurate characterization. And how many people, and this is a thing that you see all the time, is you see somebody who was raised in a really fundamentalist denomination of Christianity or another religion, and then
yeah,
they get out of that, and they don't have like you and I assume we have some level of like normalcy of like what is a safe situation, what is not a safe situation, where should
right,
we be, where should we, where should we not be, what is something that I can handle emotionally normally, and what is a level of labor that I can handle normally. And if somebody started asking us to do like, I need XYZ sacrifice from you, we would say, no, I'm not doing that. But people get out of these fundamentalist groups and they're like, I don't know what is normal and what is not normal. And they find themselves, because, they're vulnerable people, they find themselves being taken advantage of by like an abusive partner, or they might find themselves being taken advantage of in like a sex trafficking situation, or like a human trafficking situation or something. It's really sad. And then they get out of that, and they have all the guilt and shame that has been on them for dealing with this, and they think, oh well, things actually were better when I was back in the very controlled environment. I must have been, when I left and got like sex trafficked or something, that was me choosing to sin, and that was God punishing me. And then they go back into their fundamentalist denomination, where in reality it's just like kind of like a cycle where one thing fuels the other, and if you don't really deconstruct the things that you've been through, then you're just doomed to repeat it. And that's we have a lot of listeners who are survivors of that kind of situation, and I've heard this story from them dozens of times, like
Man,
literally dozens of times, from people who have been in that sort of situation. It's just heartbreaking.
that is crazy to be
Yeah.
a victim of some type of crime and then to set your mind to, well, this is God's way of punishing me because I didn't follow the rules of religion. And
Yeah.
that's man,
I
I
mean,
want
but
you.
like that, we don't think about things that way.
No,
But we also don't have that kind of upbringing where we're being taught that, every single thing that you do is being scrutinized.
that's crazy, man. I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I did the CCD, the catechism classes. My mom was a single mom for most of my life, and she could only afford for one of us to go to Catholic school. So my sister went. I went to public school. But I mean, all my friends went to Catholic high school, went to Catholic school. I've had friends that were Buddhist and Jewish, and on Sundays it was like, hey man, we're all going to meet up at a certain time because we knew we had to go to church, to temple, to whatnot. And then when we were all said and done those things, we would all meet up and do something. And we had certain friends whose parents were very strict and strong when it came to making sure that you went to church and you did what you had to do for church. But I remember days like I wasn't a churchy person, and like I said, I was raised Catholic, but as I got older, I kind of pushed myself away from the Catholic Church. I have my own views and opinions on the Catholic Church. Those are mine. I'm not here to badmouth the Catholic Church or anything like that, but these are my views. So I left the Catholic Church and I was baptized older as a Christian. I I just believe in God. That's my thing. I just believe in God. It's not I'm not a Bible thumper, or I'm not here to push religion on anybody. I just have my own feelings, and the way I see things is the way that I see things. But I could never ever you know, be like, to somebody like, oh, you're going through all this bad shit because you're defying God. I mean, I couldn't do that or
Yeah, but
see
that's
that.
because you're a reasonable person. You're
Yeah,
you're like a normal person, and this is not. And if part of it is also like, if you're going through like a really difficult time, having a reason for that, and say, having something that you can point to and say, oh well, this is actually the cause of my problems, even if that's something like, I'm bad and I need to be better. That's still more comforting than being like, life is just kind of crazy like that. Because if
right.
life is just kind of crazy like that, you have no control. But if you can say, oh well, it's my fault, then you have control over that.
Mm,
So it kind of works against you,
yeah.
in that, I mean, it's a very reasonable trauma response that people have,
What are some of the cults that you've looked into recently that are just like mind blowing? Like
that are
you're like,
mind
holy,
blowing.
yeah,
Have you heard of Aum Shinrikyo?
I
They did
have.
the Tokyo sarin gas attack in like 1994.
Hmm.
Um, that was really interesting to read about. We did an episode about that back in January. Fascinating stuff. Um, what's crazy is just how many of these cult leaders are kind of like low level grifters and
Hmm.
just con men, and and ne'er do wells who find who get through life just trying to skate by and just trying to, take what they can get, and they figure out a hustle that works for them, and then things just kind of spiral out of control. And they at some point make a choice that they're going to say, "Oh, well, all of these people are serving me. I can take advantage of all of these people," and then they do it.
What what man, that one I watched a whole documentary on him. Um was it right here? Bhagawan Shree, the like that guru guy. Man, he
Which
was the
cult was that?
oh my god, let me see here if I can pull this up real quick. But let me see here. He was in the States, and then like he was opening up like he started the Ranch Rush
Oh, the
Rani
Rajneeshis out in Oregon.
Ranishi.
Yeah,
Yeah, man.
that's an Oregon story. There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
How what do you have you dug into any of that?
I haven't personally dug into that. I just kind of know the history of that from being out in, like, from growing up in Portland. Of course, that was like before my time.
Yeah.
Um, but talking to my parents, because I think my parents moved to Portland after that was all done with. Um, but my parents even remember them saying, well, when we first moved here, people were like, don't wear too much red or people might think you're a Rajneeshi.
Yeah. I
Because they
heard
were they were getting like homeless people off the streets of Portland and taking them off to this cult compound and just saying, "Oh, well, if sign over and, give us your rights and vote for the things that we want you to vote for, then we will, I guess, help
yeah,
you out." But they were essentially just doing human trafficking and kidnapping of people to suit their cause.
yeah, I watched a documentary on that,
Was
man.
was it the Wild Wild Country?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It was nuts. Like the size of the I guess you could say the foundation where they built everything up, and it was all the people coming, and just I was just like, holy, like how do I'm like, duh,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's mind blowing. It's truly mind blowing.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of like cult stuff that or cult adjacent stuff that you see in a lot of like new age spirituality,
Yeah.
um, kind of circles where people will kind of style themselves as spiritual mentors, as like very elevated people, like somebody who is, I guess, just like good at being a hippie and telling you how to live, and you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. I'm from Oregon.
Yeah.
I I know these, I meet these people, I know these people, and like if you're around them enough, you're just like, sure, whatever, okay. I mean, it's just the kind of thing where never like I never really trust somebody who decides that they're an educator before they want to listen.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? Like somebody who's like, let me teach you this, but they don't actually know anything about you to know that they can, like, there's a certain level of narcissism to that. Um, but you do end up with that where people are essentially trying to just play off, and I don't want to disparage all new age spirituality practices, because do what makes you happy, but there's a certain level of people trying to just say, I like doing a lot of psychedelic drugs, and trying to conflate that with being somehow a superior human being, a spiritually connected, a superior human being who is a free thinker and a better thinker and a superior person to you because I guess they did ayahuasca or something and
yeah.
know
Now,
the knowledge from that. Like, okay,
now, like you said, there's a lot of people they go so deep into this and
yeah.
believe it to the fullest extent. And no matter what you say, or no matter what you do or prove, they it will not they will not turn their back on what they're believing in. Now, with that being said, you doing the podcast, what is the backlash you get? I'm sure you're getting stuff. Well, I know that you're lying. And that I'm sure you're getting a ton of backlash.
So the thing is, I don't get a lot of backlash. She gets more backlash than I do. Um, And part of that is because I was never raised fundamentalist, so I don't really have the it's kind of funny actually. I wasn't raised fundamentalist in any sense whatsoever. So like the people who are mad about the show are more mad about her doing it than they are. I'm just like, oh, he's that guy that's on the show with her. Where I mean, and that's kind of who I am. She gets a lot of backlash from people who are fundamentalists who are like, one, there's a lot of misogyny in there where they get angry if any woman is, talking about theology, is talking about, doctrines, is questioning the authority of the leadership. They see that, even if they maybe don't want to admit it, because sometimes they will just explicitly admit, oh, women aren't allowed to, do these things. But also, there is a certain level of people who are just always going to be mad at you if you're talking about these things, if you're challenging what they see as their right to power or their right to control, or even just the validity of their worldview. There's always going to be backlash to that, and you just kind of have to accept it. But the reality is that you can kind of ignore a lot of those people, because if somebody is being that, um our show is for the people who want to listen to it and the people who need it, not for the people who hate us.
Right.
And that's kind of the thing, is that you just kind of have to do what you do for you and for your community, and for, and try to build something that's positive, rather than focusing on all of the people who have been abusive or cruel to you or mean to you in the past. And that, I think, is a stronger message of positivity, and than you can get from a group that's telling you, oh, you have to dress this way, and if you don't dress this way, and if you don't act this way, then God is going to punish you, and it's proof that you have sin in your heart and that you're shameful.
You're now what how old was she
About 20 when she
when
got
she
out.
when she got out? Now she was completely raised in this.
Yeah, so her dad was her pastor. um
Oh.
Yeah, her dad was her pastor. She was a pastor's kid. Um, and he was somebody who and I met this man. He was a very kind man. He was a very good man. He actually passed a couple of years ago, very sad, because she and him were very close. Um, her dad was raised Methodist, which, for people that aren't familiar with Christian denominations, Methodist is a very like mainstream Christian denomination in the United States. It's Methodists are mostly not crazy people. Um, but he was raised Methodist, and he was part of a church, and the pastor of that church was in some way, I think, corrupted, or had some, I think, infidelity scandal, something like that. And his reaction to that was, well, clearly he can't have been receiving the true light of the gospels. I need to find something that's stricter, something that is more morally upstanding. And that's how he found Jack Hyles, and audio tapes of Jack Hyles' sermons. And
Mm.
then from listening to those audio tapes, he decided that he wanted to go to Jack Hyles Bible College, which is called Hyles Anderson College, which is in, I think, Crown Point, Indiana. Um, and then from there, he became a fundamentalist pastor. Sadie then went to, she was raised in this kind of church, and she went to that same Bible college she and I are the same age, so she would have started there in 2011, um and the
Hmm.
fall of 2011. So in the summer of 2012, Jack Hyles' son-in-law was a guy named Jack Scop, who was the pastor after Jack Hyles had died. Jack Scop got caught uh sexually abusing a 16-year-old who was a member of the church, who was at a student at the church affiliate high school. And the way that the denomination or the way that the church responded to that, and the lack of moral upstandingness, and the essentially like trying to cover up for the abuse, and trying to like sidestep it, and prevent it from being a big, and they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, and trying to not let his, trying to say, oh, this is just a problem of his moral failing rather than it being like a systemic problem. At the same time, she was facing disciplinary actions uh, for failings that were, I don't even say failings, but she was just essentially being treated poorly, and being, just her concerns were not being taken seriously by the administration. Like, she got sent to, nearly expelled from Bible college from getting a side hug from her boyfriend. Not even like a kiss or anything, just having.
So any type of
Yeah.
connection or anything like that is just a no-no.
Yeah, and at the same time, the guy the who was the head of like the disciplinary council who was punishing her for this was the son of Jack Scopp, who was asking people to write letters of, asking for leniency for the judge who was sentencing his dad to 10 years in prison for being a pedophile. And so there was just this level of hypocrisy, and that was one of the things that really made her and her whole family essentially decide to leave. Um, and
So
that
it
takes a certain
it
amount of
wasn't
time to
just
do.
her, it was her whole family that left that.
Well, they all kind of did individually, but it all sort of started around the same time.
Mm,
Yeah. And that was, I mean, I talked to her about that stuff, and that is, it's a very difficult time because it's everything that and you have to decide, what do I think is true? And people aren't just raised, like we are
yeah.
with, okay, I know how science works. I know how, there's no like normal thing for them to revert back to, because the only thing that they're raised with, the only thing that they know, is the world that is the information that is cult approved. So
Yeah.
she has to
Everybody,
like go through and learn everything
their
herself.
whole life was right in that area, and now being kind of like pushed out a little bit, you don't have that choice but to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. We're just going to go over here. I mean, it's
Yeah,
man, that's
but that's
it's
scary.
got hard to start fresh like that after putting so many years into something you truly believed in, and then you seeing what's actually happening and be like, holy shit.
Yeah, and that's something that is, and a lot of people, they saw all of this stuff that happened, and they decided to stay anyway. And not everybody, big shocks like this, not everyone decides to get out. Um,
That happens a lot though. I've seen that a lot
yeah,
on the news where you know you have these high ranking people in different things. It could be religion, it could be in something else, where something like this happens to where they end up having some type of sexual connection with some minor, and when they get caught, okay, yeah, they get the slap on the wrist, but then you have that group of their so-called like admirers on the side, like, well, it really isn't as bad as you think it is. And
yeah,
it's
and then
just
they'll victim blame, or they'll say like, well, she came on to him, and how is he supposed to like that kind
yeah,
of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing everywhere. It's the same thing, I mean, where, or they'll just like cover it up, and they'll ship the person to a different church or whatever. I guess the Catholic Church did this, what was that, a couple decades ago, and they got in big trouble for that, where they were, have these pedophile priests, and they were just shipping them to a different parish when they got caught for it. um and ironically, that's the sort of thing that like these independent Baptists, these Christian fundamentalists, what they will do is they will rage about how the Catholic Church is, evil for doing this, and then do the exact same thing themselves.
yeah.
So
It's I don't know, man. I just find it, I honestly, it's sickening to me. Any type of anybody who wants to hurt a child in
yeah,
general, it's just oh my god.
yeah,
I
no,
don't
the child abuse is, I mean, child abuse is really rampant. I read this book um called To Train Up a Child, which is which is a Christian fundamentalist child raising manual. This book would sicken you. I mean, the techniques for essentially like beating your child into submission, what they recommend, this is like a commonly recommended book in this denomination of Christian fundamentalism. Uh, it's called To Train Up a Child by Michael and Debbie Pearl. And the premise of the book is that you're essentially trying to break your child's will like you're breaking the will of a horse, so that they will be perfectly obedient. And they will say, like, if you they recommend this thing called blanket training, which is essentially where you take like a 6-month-old baby and you put them on like a blanket, and you put a toy that the child desperately wants outside of the blanket. And if they crawl to try to go get it and they go outside of the blanket, you hit them in the hand with the back of a wooden spoon.
What the hell?
Yeah. I'm not joking about this. I'm not making this up. I'm not exaggerating. And
Yeah.
and you just repeat it until they don't go for the toy anymore. And they recommend doing this with 6-month-old children. 6-month-old children don't even have object permanence yet, so they don't even understand what's happening to them. But the thing that they need to understand before they understand anything else is that they are bad, and that they are like starting out, I want to say like indebted, and that they need to, have something they need to make up for, so that they will be obedient.
Oh my God, man.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest,
That's
my
messed up.
biggest peeves, man, is babies, infants being hurt by parents.
Yeah.
I've seen so much shit. There was some shit down in Florida not long ago, and it's just like, what are you thinking, man? Like, what are you thinking? And then there was just a couple. These guys were drag racing in a car. This was just recently posted. Mugshots for Florida. These two guys were drag racing, like just not even caring. A pregnant woman in there, with a pregnant woman in their car, they're drag racing, and it's just like,
Why is it always Florida?
I don't know, man.
Why is it always every time it's Florida? I don't know why it's always. I have some
Florida
friends.
man, Florida woman.
I have that I mean, you don't hear bath salt stories outside of Florida. Do you remember when people were talking about like face eating zombies? That was out of Florida. They have alligators down there. They eat alligators. I don't know. It's a strange place.
You can get some good gator tail, man. Gator tail's not.
I've never had gator. I've actually heard gator tail's good. So,
my wife likes the blackened gator tail, which is like seasoned properly and stuff. I'm not a big gator tail person, but but yeah, man,
I've heard alligator tastes like chicken. That's the thing. I've heard it tastes like
everything tastes like chicken.
That's because chicken tastes like everything.
It does, bud.
Yeah.
It really, really does. But Gavi, man, hey brother, I want to thank you so much, man, for coming on today and hanging out with me, brother. It was a lot of fun.
I'm having a great time. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And so tell everybody where they can find you and all that good stuff.
I'm not big on social media. You can follow my Instagram. It is at GAVRIELHACOHEN, but I mostly just post pictures of like normal people stuff. You can follow the podcast Instagram, which is at Leaving Eden Podcast. You can follow the podcast. It's wherever you get your podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We don't do a video podcast, but the audio is up there on YouTube if you want to listen.
Okay. Do you have anything big coming up that you're working on, or?
We've got a series going on about the book of Revelation, which, if for people who aren't familiar, is the final book in the New Testament. And it's where all of these beliefs about the rapture, the end times, the end of days come from. Very interesting. There's a lot of beliefs that people have about this book that are extremely not based in scripture or fact or any sort of reality, but more based in like psychotic paranoia than anything else. So that's been a lot of fun to kind of deconstruct, because that's a book that a lot of people who are raised in this kind of Christian fundamentalism have trauma regarding and trauma following. So that's what you might want to check out. That's what we're working on right now.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, Gavi, thanks again, brother, for coming in and hanging out with us. I deeply appreciate it, man. And like I said, anybody you want to check it out, I'll have all the links in the description on this podcast. So make sure you hit that like, subscribe button, and get on over to the podcast, man, and give them a follow.
Yeah, appreciate it. You have a great day.
Yeah, you too, man.